Okay, so today we're taking a deep dive into something
Yeah.
that might seem pretty basic at first glance, but it's actually like a key
Yeah.
to feeling really confident when you're speaking English.
For sure.
And that is those three little words, has, have, and had.
Right.
You know,
It's funny how
even native speakers
it can be tricky.
trip up on these sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to be checking out a really fun episode of the podcast English Unlocked.
I love that podcast.
Daniel and Emma.
Yeah.
And they're
great.
They're awesome.
Yeah.
They're so clearly passionate about
Yeah.
making English feel less intimidating for learners.
Absolutely.
And I have to say, I even picked up a few things listening to them.
Oh, cool.
So,
I'm excited to dive in.
yeah.
It's amazing how these like tiny words, right?
Right.
Like has, have, and had.
Yeah.
Different forms of the verb to have.
Mm-hmm.
They're like woven into like practically every sentence we speak, you know?
That's true.
Like they really are these building blocks
They are.
of so much of our communication.
We use them constantly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For everything.
Yeah.
From talking about the things that we own
Mhm.
to the experiences that we've had.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Go.
Daniel and Emma, in this episode, they pointed out
Yeah.
that mastering these words, it goes beyond just like
Right.
knowing the basic rules. It's
Yeah.
like using them with more nuance and precision.
Totally. Yeah. Like think about the tenses, right?
Yeah.
Like we often use have in the present perfect tense
Okay.
to describe actions that started in the past
Uh-huh.
and then continue into the present.
Okay.
Like, for example, I have lived in this city for 10 years.
Right.
It's a subtle but important distinction
Yes.
from simply saying, I live in this city.
That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah.
It's subtle,
It is.
but it adds this layer
Yes.
of depth to our communication.
It does.
And it's something that even advanced English learners sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, they might struggle with
For sure.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And speaking of nuances,
Yeah.
the podcast episode also touched on how native speakers often use the past perfect tense,
Uh-huh.
which is where had comes in
Right.
to clarify like the order of events in the past.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Imagine you're telling a story about missing a train.
Okay.
You could say, I missed the train because I was late.
Right.
But using the past perfect tense,
Right.
it adds a little more clarity.
Okay.
Like you could say, I missed the train because I had been delayed at work.
Right.
You know, it shows that the delay happened
Right.
before you missed the train.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about like these little tweaks that add precision and flow
That's
to
right.
our storytelling.
For sure.
But let's go back to the basics for a second.
Okay.
Daniel and Emma did a really good job of breaking down when to use has versus have.
Yes, they reminded us that has is used with I, you, we, and they.
Okay.
And then has is used with he, she, it, or singular nouns.
Right.
It seems straightforward,
Yeah.
but it's easy to slip up, especially when we're speaking quickly.
It is.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely caught myself
You too?
making those mistakes,
Yeah.
even after years of speaking English.
Yeah, for sure.
But they also made a really interesting point about contractions.
Oh, yeah.
They said that while contractions like I've and he's, they sound more natural in like casual conversation.
Right.
There are times when using the full forms like I have and he has
Yeah,
can actually be more effective.
that's right.
So,
Think about like giving a presentation or writing a formal email.
yeah.
Using those full forms can give a sense of deliberateness and professionalism.
Yes.
It's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
That's what I love about language. It's
Yeah.
not just about following rigid rules. It's about understanding like the nuances and making choices
Totally.
that enhance our communication.
For sure.
But tell me what else really stood out to you
All right.
from this podcast episode.
What really fascinated me was their discussion about
Yeah.
how have can be used to express obligation.
Oh, okay.
It's this subtle shift in meaning
Okay.
that I think can easily trip up non-native speakers.
Oh, you mean like saying, I have to go to the store,
Exactly.
or she has to finish her homework.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's not about possession in those cases.
Got it.
It's about necessity or obligation.
Right.
And it's a really common way
Yeah.
to express these ideas in English.
You know, it's funny because we use those expressions all the time
We did.
without even thinking about it. But
Yeah.
for someone learning English, it's like this whole other
It's another layer.
layer of complexity.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and it highlights how much context
Mhm.
plays a role in language.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
The same word can have multiple meanings.
Exactly.
Depending on how it's used in a sentence.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we're giving you, the listener,
Right.
some practical takeaways here.
Yeah.
You already know the basic rules
Right.
for has, have, and had.
Right.
But how can you take your understanding to that next level?
I like that.
Any suggestions?
Yeah. One thing that Daniel and Emma emphasized was the importance of active listening.
Okay.
They really encourage listeners to pay close attention to how native speakers use these words in different contexts.
It's like turning everyday conversations into these mini English lessons.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool.
Yeah, and you can watch movies.
Okay.
You can listen to podcasts. You can even eavesdrop on conversations at a coffee shop.
Right.
Discreetly, of course.
Of course.
And notice how native speakers naturally incorporate these words into their speech.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the rhythm, the intonation, the subtle ways they use contractions or the full forms.
Yeah.
It's like absorbing the music of the language.
It's amazing how much we can learn.
It is.
Just by observing and absorbing the language around us. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it really is. And it reinforces that idea that language learning is like an ongoing process. You know, it's not just about memorizing the rules.
Right.
It's about developing an ear for the nuances and the subtleties of how it's actually used.
Yeah, and that brings us to another key takeaway from the podcast.
Yeah.
Daniel and Emma really stress the importance of practice, practice, practice.
Oh, yeah.
But they weren't talking about just doing grammar drills. They were talking about creating your own sentences using has, have, and had in different contexts.
That's such a valuable tip.
Right. Because by actively constructing sentences, you're not just passively absorbing information.
Yeah.
You're engaging with the language and making it your own.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And they also encourage listeners to actually say these sentences out loud.
Oh, for sure.
It might feel a little silly at first.
Yeah.
But it really helps to solidify the learning process.
Yeah. When we speak a language out loud, we're engaging different parts of our brains.
Right.
And it helps to cement those grammatical structures and pronunciation patterns.
It's like anything else we learn.
Yeah.
The more we practice, the more natural and automatic it becomes.
For sure.
And the cool thing about language learning is you can practice anywhere, anytime.
Totally.
You know, you can talk to yourself in the mirror, have imaginary conversations in your head, even narrate your day using these words.
What's so fascinating is that our brains are wired for language acquisition.
Right.
So the more we expose ourselves to correct grammar and pronunciation, the more our brains start to absorb those patterns and make them automatic.
It happens without us even realizing it.
Yeah, it's almost like a subconscious process.
It is so cool.
It really is, yeah.
So even if you don't feel like you're making progress, just keep practicing, keep listening, and trust that your brain is working behind the scenes.
Trust the process.
Yeah.
To make those connections.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Mistakes are an essential part.
So important.
The learning process.
I think sometimes we get so caught up in the fear of making mistakes that we hold ourselves back from speaking freely.
Yeah. And it's those mistakes that help us grow.
They do.
Yeah. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Each time you make a mistake, you're essentially giving your brain feedback.
You're saying, okay, that didn't sound quite right.
Yeah.
Let's try it again and see if we can get it closer to the target.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how we refine our skills.
Exactly.
And develop a more natural,
yes,
effortless way of speaking.
For sure.
So embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and keep practicing.
Love it.
Now, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is that challenge of understanding the subtle ways that native speakers use these words. You know, it's not just about knowing the rules. It's about developing an ear for the nuances of everyday conversation.
For sure.
And Daniel and Emma actually had a fantastic suggestion for how to do that.
Oh, cool.
They encourage listeners to pay close attention to how native speakers use has, have, and had in conversations, movies, podcasts.
Right.
It's like having a free English lesson happening all around you.
I love that.
Right.
Yeah, it's not just about noticing the words themselves.
Right.
It's about observing the rhythm,
yeah,
the intonation, the way that native speakers just effortlessly weave these words into their sentences. It's like absorbing the music of the language.
And the more you immerse yourself in that music, the more you'll start to find your own voice and rhythm in English.
Yeah.
So to sum up, you've learned the basic rules.
Okay.
You've gotten some great tips for practicing, and you've been challenged to pay closer attention to native speakers.
Right.
But I think there's one more important takeaway from this deep dive.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's this. Mastering has, have, and had isn't just about perfecting your grammar.
Right.
It's about gaining confidence and fluency, expressing yourself more clearly, and connecting with others more effectively.
That's such a powerful point.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you feel confident in your ability to use these words correctly.
And naturally, it opens up this whole new level.
It does.
Of communication.
It empowers you to engage with the world in a deeper, more meaningful way.
And that, I think, is the ultimate goal of language learning.
I think so, too.
It's not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about using that knowledge to connect with others, share experiences, and build bridges across cultures.
Beautifully said.
And you know what I really appreciate about this deep dive? Is how it's like highlighted that even these seemingly simple things in English can have like these hidden depths.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah, it's a reminder that there's always more to learn.
Yes.
And that journey of language learning is a continuous and rewarding one.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
Think about how mastering has, have, and had can empower you to express yourself more clearly.
Connect with others more deeply and navigate the world with greater confidence.
All that.
What new possibilities open up when you feel confident in your ability to communicate effectively in English? Wow. It's really incredible how much we've unpacked about these 3 little words. You know,
I know, right?
Has, have, and had.
It's amazing.
From basic grammar rules to like the subtle nuances and usage. It's clear that mastering these verbs can have such a significant impact on your fluency and confidence in English.
And what's really stood out to me is how like the conversation shifted from simply focusing on grammatical accuracy to like understanding the rhythm and flow of natural English speech.
It's not just about knowing when to use has versus have. It's about like, you know, using contractions, effectively mastering different tenses, and even recognizing how have can be used to express obligation.
And that challenge to actively listen to native speakers,
I
think is such a valuable takeaway.
It is.
It encourages like this mindful approach to language learning.
Instead of just passively consuming content, we can actively analyze how these words are being used in different contexts, absorbing the natural cadence and intonation of spoken English.
Precisely like training your ear to recognize that subtle musicality of the language.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into has, have, and had, I encourage you to reflect on what resonated most with you. You know, perhaps it was a newfound understanding of a grammar rule. Maybe a renewed appreciation for the nuances of spoken English. Or simply a boost in your confidence to keep practicing and refining your skills.
Remember, language learning is a journey.
Yes.
Not a destination.
Not that.
Every conversation, every article, every podcast episode is an opportunity to expand your knowledge and enhance your fluency.
And as you continue on this journey, remember that mastering these 3 seemingly simple words is just one step towards unlocking the full potential of your English communication skills.
Absolutely.
So keep exploring, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep having fun
for sure
with the language.